Thank you again for the enlightening talk. And what we want to do now, do we have some questions that have been collected from the audience? This is for Dr. Morrissey. Can genetics be affected by medication taken when the child is in the womb? Can cells change in the womb?
Can you repeat the question?
Can genetics be affected by medication taken when the child is in the womb? Can cells change in the womb?
Can we affect the DNA of a whole fetus before it's born? I'm not an expert on this, but I do know that we can affect marks on the DNA called epigenetic marks. So this is another layer to the code, the genetic code that we have. And so we know, for instance, that undergoing a long period of starvation, so whole generations have had epigenetic changes as a result of their lifestyle. Whether these changes can happen as a result of taking drugs while pregnant, I don't actually know. It's certainly possible, but I don't think anyone's actually studied this and was able to say for sure.
Thank you. Next question, fairly simple. This is for Ben and Dr. Selchin. How long is each session in the 8-week program?
That's a great one. I'm glad I can actually answer that one. The sessions themselves are in the neighborhood of about 2 hours, so it's a chunk of time. We use breaks to sort of manage, manage energy through that. But that's the average session.
And once again, it's for 8 weeks, so 2 hours per week, and then there's also homework that's usually assigned, so personal meditation time or other activities.
Thank you. What is the relationship of these mindful studies? Princess Margaret, 6-week program, is the relationship between the two?
There are a number of different mindfulness groups in different places and being used in different ways. This particular study is not directly related to that, but one of the things that we found in our research around mindfulness, applying this to a number of different therapeutic challenges, is that the more the group is specifically oriented to a particular difficulty and patient population, the more helpful it is. And so we wanted our group to get very, very specific in terms of this particular challenge, and that's one of the differences.
This question is for Dr. Foster. Is the WBRT something you suggest be done for everyone or for people with history in the family?
So for the prophylactic WBRT, I assume you mean? Yeah, so it's only a subset of patients that would ever be treated this way. And as I mentioned, I think it's really just small cell lung carcinoma patients who are showing some response to chemotherapy, at least in London. So it would only be done for those patients. And I think people are looking ahead to using it for other subsets of high-risk patients.
Okay. I should point out, of course, the breakdown of the genome wasn't in effect when I graduated from medical school, so there's a lot of changes that we mentioned. I keep trying to keep up with all this stuff. Is the autoimmune therapy becoming a part of the cancer treatment?
Is this for, sorry?
No, they didn't say.
Okay.
Dr.
I think it's for you.
So there are definitely clinical trials where these compounds are actually showing a lot of promise. At the moment, there aren't clinical trials for pediatric brain tumors, but we hope that this evidence, so this research that that was founded by this foundation will actually help to change that. And in the lab, we're doing work in mice that is showing that this could actually be feasible. And so we hope that it will soon come to the clinic, although one thing is to do cutting-edge research until it gets translated. Translation is actually a big challenge, so hopefully one day we'll see clinical trials in this.
Thank you. For Dr. Sheldon and Ben, is there a plan to provide mindfulness course online in the future?
That's a great question as one of the ways of being able to disseminate this further. I think there actually are some mindfulness courses available online, but much like the last question, they're very broad, and what we find is that, that for efficacy, we need a couple of things. We need specificity, so we need to really reach the specific group and the specific challenges that people are working with, and we also need the back and forth communication with a therapist or a teacher. And so online can mean different things. Online, that's sort of just unidirectional, meaning you just listen to some recordings but you can't interact or something like that. It's not clear that that's helpful in the same kind of way. Online, that's more sort of like video conferencing, like FaceTime, Skype kind of technology, where you can actually interact back and forth, may be very promising. And so first we want to see if this is going to be helpful, and then we're going to look at the sort of the broadest ways of disseminating.
This is for Dr. Foster. Can the labeling of cancer cells be applied to develop a blood test to determine response to treatment?
So I think the question was, can labeling of cancer cells be applied to a blood test to determine response to treatment? Well, in our labs, we're labeling cancer cells and putting them into preclinical models. So you would never, obviously, be putting cancer cells into patients, but there are many other cell types that can be labeled. So we're also doing cell tracking studies for things like stem cells, for example. So that would be the other use of it, would be tracking a therapy, but it would be a cellular-based therapy. So it can be used to monitor those cells, see if they're in the right location, and see if they're surviving.
This question, I have brain cancer and have 2 small children. Should I have them tested?
Tested for,
I'm not sure.
I mean,
for genetics.
yeah, so is there a predisposition to brain cancer? I mean, we know that in some cases, so this kind of goes back to that first question about can anything affect a fetus, because some medulloblastomas occur in babies as young as 3 months old, and so there are certain predisposing mutations, but usually it's a syndrome, and so one of the features of the syndrome is a risk for medulloblastoma or other brain cancers. But those are germline mutations present in every cell of that person. And usually for sporadic brain cancers, this is quite rare. We are learning that there are some predisposing mutations, but it's not just enough to have it. There's something else that controls whether that mutation's phenotype is penetrant. And so whether you actually have a brain cancer or not is in function of a number of other things. And so I don't think that there's any reason why we would recommend now that someone who's had brain cancer would have their children tested until we know all this, but
Okay.
at the moment, no.
Combine this question for Dr. Selchin and for Ben. How does one express interest in participation in your trial? And are there any mindfulness opportunities for parents or caregivers?
Okay. I got the green light to talk, so feel happy. I'd say, kind of echoing what Dr. Selchin said, is that there are a lot of different resources out there. I think in terms of efficacy, I would say that definitely do your research, because mindfulness, some people haven't heard about it, but it's also a buzzword recently. So there are mindfulness resources for parents. There's mindfulness resources for caregivers. It's not anything that we do. And in terms of our study itself, I think right now we're just looking at participants and patients at Sunnybrook at the Odette Center. But if you want to come up to me afterwards, whoever asked this question, it's a fantastic question, we can definitely chat further about it and see what's possible.
And I'll just add a quick thought. So right now, Ben is embedded, as he was saying before, in the clinic at the ODAC Cancer Center, and patients are being identified by their clinical teams, the various clinicians, as possibly this being helpful for them, and then Ben describes it to them and gives them an opportunity. But if people in that associated with the ODAC Cancer Center start to hear about this, they can also come forward to their clinicians and ask about it as well. And we do have other mindfulness groups at Sunnybrook that might be more applicable to parents or caregivers or the like. And there are, as Ben was saying, groups elsewhere in town, not just ours.
For Dr. Morrissey, is categorizing a child's medulloblastoma tumor common practice now, and do the results affect the treatment protocol?
So at the moment, we're actually doing this at SickKids. We do subgroup all SickKids patients. We have, and since we published the method of how to do it, we've had multiple people come from all over the world to learn how to do this in other centers. It's not required for clinical practice, but it is a layer of information that can be used. Currently, the stratification schema into average and high-risk patients does not include subgroup, and so that really needs to be updated in the future. And so we hope that this is one of the things that is changing. It is transitioning to the clinic.
Again, for the mindfulness, is there future thought to provide mindfulness training at diagnosis to help release the onset of depression or preventative treatment?
That's a great question too, and so mindfulness as prevention for distress is an interesting one, and there are a number of parallel studies that we have about whether we can or can't use something like mindfulness to prevent the development of depression or serious anxiety disorders. So that's in progress.
Yeah. There are risks and benefits to WBRT. You do not mention the risks of prophylactic WBRT, so this would be Dr. Foster.
Yeah, I should have added that actually to my last answer. The thing is, there are a lot of negative effects of WBRT. You don't want this if you don't need it. It is your whole brain being irradiated, and I guess notably there are cognitive effects, so cognitive decline. So that's a big risk. Obviously only for patients who are very high at risk of developing a brain tumor.
And again, for you, Dr. Foster, are there hypotheses or ideas on how to target the dormant cancer cells?
So that is the ultimate question, I guess. Dormant cancer cells, they're pretty difficult to study because there aren't really any markers for these cells, no specific markers. So radiotherapy, we know, is not likely to affect them. Chemotherapy, not likely to affect them because it also targets proliferating cells. So what we're doing, I guess, is just trying to understand them better and to eventually get to that point.
Okay. And Dr. Morrissey, what are the challenges of rebiopsying the secondary recurrent tumors?
The challenges of rebiopsy. Well, after we've presented these results, I'm not a neuro-oncologist, I'm not a surgeon, but I was talking to a surgeon who was, I guess, a little bit unwilling to rebiopsy because it is brain surgery. So you have to once again open the skull, take another biopsy, and from his point of view, there had to be a big burden of proof that this was required because you have to convince the patient and their family to go through yet another surgery. So I think that would be one of the main challenges, convincing people that this is important, and then having surgeons who are on board with taking this approach. Thank you.
Okay. This is for Dr. Selchin and Ben. I'm thinking of how important is it for everyone to let go of the small stuff?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? But and I mean, we're all, you know, there was a giggle through the crowd on that, but we actually get so preoccupied with the things that we have the least control over, and we forget that there's actually a lot that we can do around all of the small stuff in our lives. So the small stuff builds up into lots of stuff, and we sometimes don't have to go after the big stuff. If we focus on working differently with the small stuff, then we can cope more effectively with the big stuff.
Now, I think one thing that when people ask me about mindfulness, you know, it's an option, right? And it's not, I mean, it's not going to be the solution. It's not going to be the end-all solution. But I do think that this is one way of seeing that this is something that can get involved and cause struggle in our lives. So I definitely think if that's something that whoever asks this question thinks is effective, then that's good. That's one way of looking at it.
What kind of coping strategies have been shown to be helpful for people with brain tumors? Specific coping strategies. You mentioned some, but...
I think specifically, I mean, I'm just trying to remember back to when I did all this research in particular. I think that there's a number of different methods of coping, not only for brain tumor survivors, but for people who go through stress in their life, right? And any stressor you experience, I was talking about this with one of the people there last night at the dinner. Any stressor you go through, it will cause potential consequences, and it will cause issues and further issues. So I think that as a brain tumor survivor, something that might be helpful for someone else experiencing another stressor might also be helpful for you. So, I mean, this is one option, but there are other options out there as well. So I'm more than happy to chat afterwards about that.
And as well, sorry, just to piggyback on that. But again, one of the reasons for this study is that what we found when we were looking around was how much there was research-wise showing the difficulty, and comparatively how little evidence there was for approaches for actually coping with that. And so we wanted there to be something clear that people could turn to. Yeah.
With the controversy of the MMR vaccine and autism, any research on the early polio vaccines and causing tumors? Open a can of worms.
I have no idea.
Nobody wants to answer that one.
I have no idea, actually.
I don't either. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Now, this is an interesting one for Stephen Rawlings. What was the lineup of the 1968 Detroit Tiger World Series roster? I think that's about caught our time. Are there any other burning questions at the moment? What we want to do now is, first of all, give a big thank you for our panel, Dr. Morrissey, Dr. Foster, Selchin, and Ben. I think it's really exciting to see the type of work that's being done, and to know that fundraising obviously is being used for research, and that we'll be seeing further changes coming along. We hope that we get the best care and treatments possible. There will one day be an actual cure for brain tumors. So we have some gifts for our panel that Karen will give out at this point.